He leaves Singapore quietly, without ceremony, on the morning of 28th of February 1994. A 36-year-old man, thin, soft-spoken, moving through ferry terminals with a backpack and a plan to disappear only temporarily, a personal reset, a retreat, a one-month break from a difficult stretch of life. This is Thomas Yeo See Ming, and this is the last time Singapore ever sees him. But what no one knew that morning was that Thomas wasn't just leaving the country. He was walking into the last confirmed chapter of his life. Thomas wasn't running from crime. He wasn't on the brink of scandal. His life at that point was ordinary but heavy. He had recently left jobs, cycled between short-term employment, and struggled with setbacks that people close to him described as weighing him down. So he planned something simple, an escape into nature. A month of solitude, a meditation-style break. And back in the early 1990s, Southeast Asia offered places where a person could breathe. Quiet beaches, rustic islands, forests untouched by tourism. For Thomas, that sanctuary was Pulau Cebu Basar, a Malaysian island off the east coast of Johor. Remote, slow, peaceful. He boards a ferry, then another. Not hurried, just alone. But here's the part that draws investigators back every time they revisit the file. Everything he does on this journey is normal. Everything is traceable. Everything makes sense. Right up until the moment it doesn't. Between February 28th and March 3rd, Thomas moves steadily from mainland Malaysia to the Cebu archipelago. No strange behavior at checkpoints, no reports of distress, no witnesses noted fear, paranoia, or conflict. He is a man on holiday, nothing more. On the 3rd of March 1994, he arrived at Pulau Cebu Basar. He checks into a resort, records confirm his registration, his room, and his intended stay. Staff remember him as quiet, polite, and self-sufficient. He ate simply. He kept mostly to himself, but he wasn't withdrawn. He wasn't hiding. He helped locals occasionally, lending a hand at the pier, carrying items, buying meals for a few island workers. Small gestures that stood out because he didn't have to do them. People noticed him, but not in a way that raised any concern. And that is one of the chilling features of this case. Every verified witness describes Thomas as calm, normal, and peaceful. Nothing about him telegraphed what was coming. Before we continue, if you're following this investigation and you want more cases like this, the ones where the truth is stranger, colder, and more silent than fiction, hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel more than you think. Now, back to the island. Pulau Cebu Basar in 1994 wasn't the semi-developed tourist spot it is today. It was raw, forested, sparse, a place where a single step off the beach could take you into dense undergrowth within seconds. Thomas seemed to embrace that. Witnesses say he walked the forest trails frequently, sometimes alone for hours, sometimes returning with small scratches from branches or mud on his shoes. Nothing dramatic, just a man exploring an island that at the time still felt untouched. But what Thomas didn't know, and what makes this case so haunting, is that every movement he made on that island would become the last clear thread investigators ever had. There were no warnings, no strange encounters, no arguments, no signs of mental distress. Every verified detail paints the same picture. A traveler settling into a routine. Beach, forest, food, sleep, repeat. Locals noted how helpful he was, how he sometimes purchased meals for staff, how he carried himself politely but kept to simple routines. And then the detail that investigators consider crucial. He began walking deeper into the forest trails as the days passed. By March 1014, he had become a familiar sight to the few people on the island. They saw him hiking, they saw him buying small items, they saw him moving quietly but confidently. Nothing about him looked lost. Nothing about him looked troubled. This is the part that chills most people. In missing person cases, there is usually a moment, even a small one, where something feels off. But in Thomas's timeline, there is no such moment. Everything stays normal until the final verifiable step he takes. On the 15th of March 1994, Thomas heads toward the forested hills again. This is verified by multiple locals who saw him walking inland during the day. He wasn't carrying heavy gear. He wasn't packing as if leaving. It was just another hike. This is the last confirmed sighting of him alive. From this point forward, the timeline shatters. A Singaporean tourist arrives on a Malaysian island, begins a quiet routine, keeps to himself but engages politely, walks the trails, explores the forest. and then takes one final step into the trees. By the time Thomas Yeo had spent a little over a week on Pula, Cebu, Basar, he had already become a familiar face to the people who lived and worked along the island's shoreline. He wasn't loud, he wasn't social, he wasn't even particularly noticeable, but he was present, quietly weaving himself into the background of daily island life. Between 3rd and the 15 March 1994, locals recalled a man who kept to himself, yet wasn't unfriendly. He would occasionally lend a hand at the jetty when fishermen struggled with ropes. Sometimes he bought simple meals for others without saying much afterward. He wandered the beach at a slow pace, watched boats drift in and out, and walked the forest trails with no urgency, no companions, and no visible equipment beyond what he carried on him. He looked, by all accounts, like someone trying to untangle his own life in silence. But in missing person cases, the quiet ones often leave the loudest mysteries, because they move without patterns, without warnings, without witnesses to their final decisions. As the days passed, Thomas appeared to develop a routine. Morning walks, long stretches by the coastline, occasional help at the pier, and sometimes short hikes into the forested hills where the air grew heavy and the canopy swallowed the light. Pula, Cebu, Basar in the early 1990s was still rugged, dense inland vegetation, steep natural ridges and trails that turned quickly from walkable to isolating within minutes. The island was beautiful, but it did not offer the safety nets of an urban environment. Paths were not marked. Cellular coverage didn't exist, and once you stepped off a known route, you were on your own. Yet Thomas never appeared afraid of the terrain. Locals would see him slip into the forest and hours later reappear along the beach as if nothing unusual had happened. But on the 15th of March 1994, he walked up the same path he had taken before, and this time, no one ever saw him come back down. That day marks the final confirmed sighting of Thomas Yeo. A simple moment, unremarkable to everyone around him at the time. Witnesses saw him move toward the forested hills after midday light settled across the island. He wasn't in distress. He wasn't being followed. There was no conflict, no argument, no commotion, just a solitary man walking into nature. This is the last verifiable record of Thomas alive. There were no sightings later that evening, no conversations recalled by staff or guests, no reports of anyone hearing calls for help or seeing someone injured or watching a stranger wander near dangerous terrain. He simply never returned to his chalet. At first, no alarm was raised. Thomas wasn't bound by itineraries. He didn't socialize with other tourists. He didn't have a strict schedule with the resort. People described him as independent, someone who came and went without explanation. So his absence that night didn't immediately stand out. If you're following this story and want to see how deep these disappearances can go, make sure you subscribe. Stories like this one, cases with no suspects, no clues, and no logical end, are what we uncover here every week. Back on the island, time kept moving. The next morning, no one noticed anything unusual. Guests checked out, new ones arrived, boats came in with supplies. Thomas's movements were so undisturbed, so self-contained that his missing presence blended into the background. The forest he walked into was a place that could turn unforgiving very quickly. The hills were steep, the undergrowth was thick, and unlike well-trafficked nature reserves, Pula, Cebu, Basar had long stretches where a person could be completely alone. If someone were to collapse, get injured, or lose their way, there were no large search patrols regularly combing the area. Locals moved by knowledge, not maps. Tourists stayed near the beach, and a man walking into the bush alone could vanish from sight within minutes. But even if Thomas had gotten lost, the island itself was small, only about 7 kilometers long. Small islands do not swallow people permanently without leaving a trace, unless something else went wrong. For now, the island kept its silence. Days passed. No one reported Thomas missing. No ferry operators noticed anything odd. No staff member recalled seeing him after the hike, and there were no records of him attempting to leave the island, because ferry logs did not show his departure at any point following that final sighting. He was still somewhere on Pula, Cebu, Basar, or he had been. What no one knew was how little time remained before this would shift from a simple absence to an official disappearance. But on the 15th of March, at the moment he stepped into the forest, none of that was clear yet. What investigators would later emphasize was this: everything about Thomas's final day was ordinary. No suspicious individuals, no signs of a dispute, no reports of robbery or conflict. The trail he walked was one he had already taken before, yet that afternoon he walked it for the last time. Sometimes the most chilling disappearances are not the dramatic ones. They are the ones that begin in absolute silence, with a man taking a familiar path into the trees. By nightfall, the resort was quiet, the beach is calm, the hills are dark, and Thomas Yeo had already crossed the threshold from traveller exploring a remote island into a man whose absence no one had yet discovered. He did not return that night, he did not return the next day, and he did not return in the days after that. But the world would not know he was gone until someone finally unlocked his room, and what they found changed everything. For 4 days, Thomas Yeo's absence drifted quietly through the resort, unnoticed, unremarked on, and unexplained. This was the danger of being a solitary traveller. Silence becomes normal. People assume you are somewhere else, doing something else, following your own schedule. But on the 19th of March 1994, that silence finally broke. A staff member noticed that Thomas had not been seen for several days. His room remained untouched, his bed was undisturbed, and in a place where guests usually move in and out with a certain rhythm, the stillness around his chalet began to feel wrong. That morning, a resort staffer walked down the sandy path to Thomas's room, knocked on the door, and heard nothing. This wasn't a missing person alert yet, just a moment when something ordinary stops feeling ordinary. When the worker knocked again and still received no response, they made a decision. They unlocked the door. What they found would trigger one of the strangest disappearance investigations in Malaysian island history. Inside, the room was quiet. Nothing was overturned. Nothing suggested panic or urgency. No signs of a struggle, no sign of a guest who had packed to leave. Everything looked exactly as a room looks when someone fully intends to return to it. On the table sat his passport, the one document no traveller leaves behind when planning to move between borders. Next to it was his wallet, containing his cash and identification. His clothing was neatly arranged. Personal items were placed where he had left them. There was no bag packed, no clothes missing, no sign of preparations for a sudden departure. Thomas had walked out with nothing but what he usually carried on a hike, and he had never come back. People can vanish, but they rarely vanish without taking the things they need to survive, and Thomas left behind every tool required to leave the island alive. The staff didn't jump to worst-case scenarios immediately, but the facts were simple. A solitary guest, not seen for days, with his essential belongings still in the room, and importantly, no recorded ferry departure under his name. Ferries in 1994 were manually logged. If Thomas had boarded one, his details should have appeared in the departure books. But there was no trace of him leaving Pula, Cebu, Basar. At this point, the staff reported the situation to the resort management. They checked again. They verified. They looked around the resort grounds. They asked workers if anyone had noticed him recently. Every answer was the same. No one had seen Thomas since 15th of March, a 4-day gap, a locked room, and belongings that should never be left behind. If you want more real cases just like this, cases where every fact is verified but the ending still defies logic, make sure you subscribe. These investigations take time, and every episode uncovers another layer of truth. Back on the island, management made the call that officially shifted the situation from unaccounted guest to missing person. The Malaysian police were notified. Officers arrived at the resort and inspected the chalet. They documented what they saw. Passport, wallet, clothes, personal items, everything a traveller needs to continue a journey, untouched. No signs of packing, no notes, no indications of an intentional disappearance. This wasn't someone leaving by choice. This was someone who had expected to return. And the moment police saw the passport, they knew one thing with absolute certainty. Wherever Thomas went, it wasn't through any legal or recorded exit, because without that passport, he couldn't go anywhere. Investigators began reconstructing his last known movements. Staff confirmed that Thomas had been living quietly, eating meals, hiking, and moving between the beach and the forest. Locals verified the 15 March hike, the day he walked into the inland trails and never came back. Now the timeline locked into place. 15th of March, final confirmed sighting. 16th to 18th of March, no sightings, no ferry departures, no activity at his chalet. 19th of Mopen, belongings found, police alerted. Nothing was stolen, nothing looked staged, and the island, while small, still had rugged areas dense enough to conceal someone, but only temporarily. Police asked a crucial question: why didn't anyone notice earlier? The answer was simple. Thomas kept to himself. He didn't socialize, he didn't report plans. He moved quietly, lived quietly, and, tragically, disappeared quietly. This wasn't a case where a missing person is discovered within hours. It was discovered 4 days later, long enough for any trail to grow cold. But even with 4 days' delay, investigators expected to find something. A clue, a footprint, a discarded item. Instead, they found nothing. It was as if Thomas had never returned from the hills, and the island had simply kept the secret. Police expanded their examination beyond the room. They checked the shoreline. They verified ferry logs again. They contacted local boat operators. No one had taken a lone traveler off the island during that window. There were no unofficial departures, no signs of an accident reported offshore. Every path pointed back to the forested hills where he had last been seen. This moment, the discovery of the room, untouched and silent, transformed the situation into a full-scale search operation. What had begun as a simple welfare check was now one of the most baffling disappearances in the region. The final detail from the room that investigators noted was this. Thomas's daily use items, the things he always carried, were missing, but those items would not have kept him alive indefinitely. A bottle of water, maybe a small pouch, basic things you take on a short hike. Nothing that would support days of survival. Everything else, everything essential, was still inside the chalet. This fact alone eliminated many possibilities. No planned escape. No intentional disappearance. No attempt to flee Malaysia. No preparation for a new life. Just a man who left for a hike and never returned to collect the items he needed to live. Rooms don't lie. When someone leaves behind everything they need to continue life, it means they never intended to stay gone. And Thomas didn't. He walked out expecting to return. But the island had already taken him somewhere no one could follow, and somewhere no one would ever find. When Malaysian police arrived on Pula, Cebu, Basar, they were not expecting a mystery. They were expecting a recovery. In missing person cases on small islands, the assumption is straightforward. People get lost, people get injured, and eventually, people are found. But from the moment search teams stepped onto the forest trails, they realized this case was not going to behave like a normal disappearance. The island was small, about 7 kilometers long and barely 1 kilometer wide. Rugged, yes. Forested, yes, but not vast, not remote enough for someone to stay hidden for long. And certainly not large enough for a man to vanish permanently. Yet that is exactly what was already happening. When an island is this small, people don't disappear into it. They bounce out of it, they hit a shoreline, they leave a trace. But Thomas didn't leave anything. Search teams began with the obvious, the inland forest where Thomas was last seen on 15th of March 1994. Officers walked the trails he was known to frequent. They spread out into the brush. Locals joined the sweep. For hours, then days, they combed the area looking for any sign of disturbance. Footprints, broken branches, clothing, anything. There was nothing. Not a single physical indication that Thomas had even entered the trail that day, despite witnesses confirming that he had. As the first sweep ended, Malaysian police expanded the search. They brought in K9 units. Dogs trained specifically to detect humans' decomposition and items carrying human scent. If Thomas had collapsed, if he had died, if he had even dropped something, the dogs should have reacted. But they didn't. Not once. Dogs don't play along with mysteries. If there's a body, they find it. If there's a scent trail, they follow it. Here they found nothing, because there was nothing to find. The search widened to include the entire inland region. Officers climbed ridges, scanned ravines, and checked old footpaths. They looked for vantage points, for signs of a fall, for any place a person might accidentally slip and be concealed by vegetation. Still nothing. At this point, the operation escalated. Search teams moved to the coastal edges. They checked cliffs, tidal pools, rocky outcrops, and beaches. Boats were sent around the perimeter of the island. Divers entered the surrounding waters. They scanned the seabed and nearby islets. Again, nothing. No body, no clothing, no bag, no footprints, no trace. A disappearance will give you something, even a dropped shoelace, even a torn leaf. The absence here was not just a clue, it was the whole problem. Meanwhile, Thomas's family, devastated and desperate, arrived on the island. They joined police, local volunteers and resort workers in the search. They covered the same ground again and again, refusing to accept that a man could vanish into a place this small. According to reports, the island was swept more than 10 times in total. Full sweeps, high ground, low ground, north to south, east to west. Every trail, every ridge, every clearing, every shoreline. Still, there was nothing. No evidence of foul play, no confirmed sightings post 15th March, no luggage missing, no signs of an attempted escape by water, no ferry logs showing an unrecorded departure. The only solid timeline left was the one everyone agreed on. Thomas walked into the forest on 15th of March. His room was opened on 19th of March. He never returned in between. That's all they had. If you want more cases where the facts are iron tight but the ending still breaks every rule of logic, make sure you subscribe. These are the investigations we specialize in, documented, verified, and impossible to forget. Police then considered the possibility of death by natural causes, an accident, dehydration, an injury sustained alone. But they publicly stated something important. If Thomas had died anywhere on the island, the K9 units would almost certainly have detected decomposition odors, and search teams, walking the same small area repeatedly, would have found remains or clothing. None of that happened. When every explanation fails, you're left with the one thing no investigator wants to admit: the island had no answers. Underwater searches were conducted again. Boats patrolled the coastline repeatedly. Officers interviewed every resident and resort worker multiple times. Fishermen were asked if they had seen anyone swimming out or drifting in the water. No one had. There was no disturbance at his chalet, no evidence someone had entered it, no sign of theft or forced entry, no reports of arguments, confrontations, or suspicious individuals. Thomas wasn't seen being followed. He wasn't seen boarding a private boat. He wasn't seen interacting with anyone unusual. He wasn't seen in distress. He wasn't seen again at all. As the days stretched into weeks, investigators ran out of leads. The timeline was fixed. The evidence didn't change. The room stayed silent, untouched. The forest stayed empty, and the island offered no answers. By the end of nearly a month, Malaysian authorities formally ended the search. But this wasn't closure. It wasn't even a resignation. It was simply the moment the investigation hit a wall so solid that nothing could move it. How does an island this small erase a man so completely that not even the ground remembers him? As of 2025, there has never been a verified clue, sighting, or recovery of any item belonging to Thomas Yeo. No body, no evidence, no confirmation of what happened after he walked into the forest on that March afternoon. It remains one of the most enduring unsolved disappearances in Southeast Asia. A case defined not by what was found, but by what wasn't. A quiet island, a fixed timeline, a room full of belongings, and a gap, a 4-day window, where Thomas simply stops existing on any known path. There are missing person cases with leads, cases with suspects, cases with theories. This isn't one of them. This is a disappearance carved out of pure silence, a man swallowed not by danger, but by the absence of any trace of it. The search ended, the questions didn't, and the island still holds the same secret it held in 1994. A man walked into the forest, and nothing ever walked back out.